Over the past year, we've made multiple videos covering OrcaSlicer's calibration tools and how they can be used to achieve higher quality and more consistent prints. These are useful when dialing in a new printer, building a filament profile from scratch, or trying to improve upon an included profile. This series covered rotation distance, or E-steps for your extruder motor, temperature towers, max flow rate, optimal flow rate, pressure advance, and retraction. While I've had a really positive response on these, one question I've gotten multiple times is what's the best order for them to be done in? Based on conversations I've seen and been involved with, there are a few different ideas of what's best. In this video, I'll bring all of these calibrations together and show you the path I generally take to get things dialed in. So with all that being said and without further ado, let's get right into today's video. Thank you to PCBWay for sponsoring today's video. With over a decade of experience, PCBWay provides reliable, high-quality PCB prototyping and fabrication with super fast turnaround times. In addition to PCBs, they offer CNC machining, 3D printing, sheet metal fabrication, and injection molding services. I recently used their SLM printing for a 3D printed toolhead, and the results were fantastic. Whether your project is big or small, PCBWay has you covered with order quantities from 5 to 10,000 boards. Use the link in the description to get a $5 credit towards your first order today. A couple of weeks ago on the ModBot Army channel, we unboxed and set up the SOVOL SV06 ACE. While there were quite a few things I liked about it from a hardware and spec standpoint, there were only a few filament profiles and one print profile included. When we ran the test print, I noticed a bit of stringing and some slight under extrusion, which made it the perfect candidate for running it through these series of calibrations. Generally speaking, a printer you purchase ready-built should have the extruder motor calculated correctly, but it's never a bad idea to double check. In Clipper, the value for the extruder motor is called rotation distance, while in Marlin and possibly other firmwares, it's an E-step value. The process for calibrating this is heating up your hot end and loading in some filament, extruding a bit of material, and then marking a set distance above the extruder on the filament with a marker. You then request a certain distance of filament be extruded, which is normally around 50 millimeters at a slow speed. And then you measure to see whether it actually extruded the expected distance. For step-by-steps on these different calibration methods, I'll have a playlist I created with all the videos made linked in the description. If the extruded distance is exact, no change is needed. But if it's more or less, you'll need to use a simple formula to get the new values and update it in your printer's firmware. In my case, while not massive, it extruded 1 millimeter too far, so I updated the rotation distance with my new calculated value. The next thing I like to find is temperature. A lot of times with standard filaments, I already know my rough range, but in this case, I still ran a temperature tower in OrcaSlicer for PLA. There's a list of presets built in that cover a wide range, but if you're using a unique material, you can always set a custom range. With the default PLA range of 190 to 230 Celsius, I sent off the print. Using the bridge, the overhang, the overall visual appearance, and the strength of the built-in peak, I went with 220. I usually lean on the slightly warmer side, especially with the speeds and flows modern printers push to ensure higher inner layer adhesion. But there are trade-offs to this that we'll touch on in a future video. After each test, make sure to update your filament profile with your new values. Once I have the temp, I like to find the max flow rate that I can reliably achieve. Using the built-in profile's max flow rate is a good reference, but it can take some trial and error. SOVOL had their PLA profile set to 21 cubic millimeters per second as the max flow, so I went with a range of 10 to 25. For the sake of speed and less material waste, a range of 15 to 25 cubic millimeters per second would have been sufficient. You can also always stop the test print early when you see the print quality degrade. Looking at the finished print, when I angle it towards the light, I can see small gaps where the extruder skips steps, and the sheen of the filament completely change as it gets beyond a certain point. This tells me that anything at or above this level is clearly too much flow. I usually pinch and pull at this point to tear that section away, but it's more of a preference, and you can easily count the ticks on the side of the print representing each section of flow increase. In this case, I counted to right around 21, which is what SOVOL had set, but I never liked to be that close to the max, so I went with 20. Even 19 cubic millimeters per second would have been a good choice just to give the hot end a bit of additional margin. Once I have my max flow, I move on to finding the ideal flow rate for the material to give me consistent extrusion layer lines. You don't want your lines to have any gaps, so they should touch, but you also don't want your lines to overlap. We covered a new flow test mode coming into OrcaSlicer 2.2 called YOLO that gives you a new option to just print one plate of flow tests instead of the current two. However, I'm currently running the released version of OrcaSlicer with the SOVOL ACE, so I went with that method. This has you run a first tray of parts that have a wide range from increasing and decreasing flow values, and then a second where there is a smaller range that just decreases the value. This test is always left a bit up to opinion, but looking at the parts and feeling the top layer, you'll have a pretty good idea of what's correct. For my final value, I went with -2 and used the formula in OrcaSlicer's docs to update the flow ratio for my PLA profile. Next is pressure advance. OrcaSlicer has a handful of calibration methods available for this, and we've covered each of them, but for this video, I went with the classic tower test. This has you choose whether you're running a direct drive or Bowden setup, and then prints the tower with a wide range of pressure advance values. When complete, you take a ruler or calipers and measure from the base to the section that has the sharpest corner, and use a simple formula to find your new PA value. Out of all the values I changed during this calibration process, the PA value was the one that had the largest difference. With this all done, the last one I run is retraction. This is actually my least favorite, as it only checks for retraction distance and doesn't take into account retraction speed. I love OrcaSlicer's calibration functions, but I would love to see this one updated with another configurable setting for speed. This test has you pick a range of retractions and is set by default for direct drive extruders at 0 to 2 millimeters. For Bowdens, this range can be much higher, and I'd likely recommend starting at 2 millimeters and going to 8 millimeters to see where it gets you. While my test did show that with 0 retraction and close to 2 there was some minimal stringing, it's not definitive, and I'll often play around with the speeds afterwards to see if I can dial it in even further. Comparing my initial model with the one after running calibrations, I'm happy to see that I got cleaner bridging and less stringing than I started out with. Of course, there are still lots of other slicer tweaks that can be done to improve upon this further, but I'm happy with this print quality and feel much more confident in the consistency of this updated profile. This series of calibrations is definitely not something I run for every filament, and I don't even always run through the entire gauntlet of these calibrations. Rotation distance and retraction I'll likely not run again, and the main ones I'll check for different filament types are max flow, flow rate, and sometimes PA if I notice inconsistent corners. Knowing how to use these tools is extremely valuable and a great thing to have in your bag of 3D printing tricks. I hope that you enjoyed this video and that it helped clear up any questions you may have had about how I use and the order that I run these different tests in. As I mentioned earlier, this order of operations and what is best varies a bit from person to person, so it's by no means set in stone. I'd love to know in the comments what order you run these tests in to see if there's any sort of consistent pattern or if it's a bit all over the place. On that note, don't forget to like and subscribe for more great videos. We make a video just about every single week, so there's always fresh content coming your way. And if you do want to support the channel further, I'll have links down below in the description over to our Patreon where there are some really awesome rewards. Huge thank you to all of our existing Patreon supporters. I appreciate each and every one of you for allowing me to come back every single week and spend more time doing what I love, which is making content for you all to enjoy. On that note, this has been Daniel from ModBot, and I look forward to seeing you guys in my next video. Peace, guys!